at sei-philly.org. And you can also always visit our website to keep up with everything going on within our organization. And you can always reach us via email at phillysei@gmail.com. So just want to give a quick intro to our current SEI board. As I said, my name is Nikki Eno. I'm serving as the chair. We have Keith Merle as our vice chair, Mike Urban as our treasurer, Colin Drager as our secretary. Our program director is Greg Dunn. Director of Public Relations is William Kittleman. And this year joining our board is Alex Domino as Deputy Director of Public Relations, and our past chair is Jack Cardinal. So SEI Philly hosts an annual golf outing to financially support our student scholarship that we give out on a yearly basis to a qualified college student that is pursuing a field in structural engineering. This year, we're happy to say that we plan to give out $6,000 in student scholarship. Thanks to those that have attended to our golf outing last year and sponsored. This year, our golf outing is scheduled for May 3rd. So if you haven't registered, please register. It's a great time supporting a great cause. If you need the registration form, it's available at our website. And we want to give a thank you to our sponsors from last year. Our top sponsor was AECOM. So this year, the scholarship is named the AECOM Scholarship. And then we have our table sponsors, our whole sponsors, and our prize sponsors. So big thank you to all those firms for supporting. So just a reminder, if you're not speaking, to please mute yourself. Any questions that you have throughout or at the end of the presentation can be put into the chat window. And any follow-up comments or questions after the presentation can also be sent to our email account at phillysei@gmail.com. So I'm sorry, I think I skipped a slide. Okay, there it is. The topic for today's presentation is focused on ASCE's Code of Ethics, Positive Impact on the Profession. Everyone on the call will earn a PDH, and the link to the PDH will be placed in the chat at the end of the meeting. And today's PDH is also should qualify as an ethics PDH. You just need to go to each of your state's requirements and just confirm. But I anticipate there not being any issue in this qualifying as an ethics PDH. So today presenting, we have Dr. Brock Berry. Dr. Berry is responsible for the oversight and management of the nation's first civil engineering department that is annually ranked by multiple organizations as one of the top undergraduate civil engineering programs in the United States. He has a Bachelor of Science degree from Rochester Institute of Technology, a Master of Science degree from the University of Colorado at Boulder, and a PhD from Purdue University. Prior to pursuing a career in academics, Dr. Berry spent 10 years as a senior geotechnical engineer and project manager on projects throughout the United States. He is a licensed professional engineer, and his areas of research include assessment of professional ethics, teaching and learning in engineering education, nonverbal communication in the classroom, and learning through historical engineering accomplishments. He has authored and co-authored a significant number of publications on these topics. So with that, I will pass it over to Brock to start his presentation.
Okay, so first of all, just a quick confirmation. You should be seeing my slides, Nikki.
Yep.
Okay, great. So hey, folks, really appreciate getting a chance to chat with you today. I'm going to start out with a quick apology. Somebody decided that today would be a great day to test the fire alarm system in my building. So if you hear an alarm in the background, I apologize for that. In theory, it should not be particularly loud. And rest assured, I am safe. There is no emergency in my building at this time. But do want to remind everybody, do kindly keep your microphones muted. I will use the chat function extensively today. There's a number of check on knowledge along the way to make sure that you're earning your PDHs. And I'm going to ask you to reply to prompts using the chat function. And we're going to start out with one right away, which is just asking folks to type in a yes or no answer. Have you had any reason to previously read the Code of Ethics for ASCE? And by that, I mean the newest version of the Code of Ethics that was released in 2020. So a yes or no answer into that chat function. Seeing a plethora of no's, and that's a-okay. The reality is, if you'd had a reason to review it, there might have been a concern somewhere along the way, and I might want to ask you more about that. I did see, looks like at least one yes that did pop up there, but the majority of you are no's. By the end of the 1 hour presentation today, you will all be experts in the Code of Ethics. You'll get a chance to review it. And I know you're going to get a chance to review it because Nikki did send you a copy of it in the link for today's presentation. So please make sure you've got access to that. If you don't already have it pulled up electronically, I strongly encourage you to do so that you've got it ready to go, and you'll be able to access it when we get to that point in the presentation. So as was indicated, I'm an educator, so I work well with learning objectives. I identify specifically what are the hopes and dreams and expectations for what you're going to be able to achieve by the end of the 1 hour presentation. The first one is you should be able to explain the role of a code of ethics, any code of ethics, in what would be just largely described as a profession in general. You're also going to be able to describe the rationale as to why ASCE at some point a few years ago decided it was time to completely throw out the old code of ethics and write a new code of ethics. We'll talk about some of the background information behind that. We'll talk about the activities that were used by the task committee that was established to write that new code of ethics. We'll explain advantages associated with the new code itself. And then, of course, you'll get a chance to apply that code. So that's where you'll really want to have a copy of the Code of Ethics pulled up and ready to go so that you can prove to me that you've got an understanding of how to apply that to a handful of ethical dilemmas. So we'll start out with achieving the first learning objective right away here on our first slide, and that is to be able to define a profession and understand how a Code of Ethics nests within a profession. So there are 5 commonly accepted parameters that make something a profession, and congratulations, you are part of a profession. You're part of the profession of civil engineering, and that profession is based on or built on a large knowledge base. So in your case, you have to have a minimum of a bachelor's degree to be considered part of the profession of civil engineering, and then typically to continue in that profession, the expectation is that you're gaining some amount of extensive training or experience along the way. So first objective, we as civil engineers tend to check that box pretty easily. The second one is that the skills provided by the members are important to society. Without question, the skills that civil engineers provide are highly valued by society. There's a lot of unfortunate news related to civil engineers in the news right now with respect to the bridge collapse, just to the south of where you folks are located, and recognize that puts a spotlight on the role of the civil engineer. And do people absolutely understand and appreciate the background, the knowledge, the expertise that the civil engineers bring to society. We have to be self-regulating. We have to have some sort of mechanism to determine who gets into the profession and who's asked to leave the profession. In some cases, that's considered to be licensure, but understand that you do not need to be licensed to be part of a profession. We have a lot of non-licensed civil engineers that are part of the profession of civil engineering, but we do have mechanisms by which we can control who gets in and who has to be asked to leave at some point. You have to have some autonomy in the workplace, and for the younger members of the profession that are on the call right now, you may feel like the day in and day out you don't have the ability to make decisions yourself, but the truth is, as you continue to progress through the profession and climb that corporate ladder, you get more and more autonomy in the process of how you go about your daily business. And then the last one is the one that we're really focused on today, and that is you have to have some sort of guide or set of ethical standards that are written down that the profession prescribes to and says, this is something we all agree on. So the profession of civil engineering uses the ASCE Code of Ethics as the code of ethics by which we all use as a guided principles by which we go about our daily business. So real quickly, yes, we are a profession of civil engineers. We check all the boxes And the last one we're focusing on today is the Code of Ethics that ASCE has developed. I want you to make sure you understand that there is common content between our sister organizations or sister professions. So electrical engineers, mechanical engineers, nuclear engineers, you name it. All those professions have their own set of written principles or a code of ethics. And if you would take a close look at those, you're going to find that each one has some common language between them. They're not all structured the same. I've provided links here for IEEE, which is the Electrical Engineers and Computer Engineering profession, ASME, which is American Society of Mechanical Engineers, obviously ASCE, you've already got a copy of that, and then NSPE. If you take a close look at the NSPE Code of Ethics, you'll notice that it's structured remarkably similar to the way the ASCE's code is structured. One of the things that we'll point out with any code of ethics is that it's not going to be real specific relative to if you're going into a particular issue or particular dilemma that you're facing in your own profession, in your own daily activities. You're not going to find something specific that may call out, hey, if you've been offered a lunch and that lunch costs $25, is there specific language in there that talks about lunches that cost $25? No, that does not exist within a code of ethics, but there is real clear guidance relative to, is that lunch considered some sort of bribery or fraud? Then you might have some concern associated with it. But recognize any code of ethics is not written with an extreme level of detail and guidance relative to dealing with ethical dilemmas down to a finite detail. So this is our first check on learning. Again, this is where I expect people to type into the chat function. We just covered 5 parameters that make something a profession. I want folks to type in any of those 5. I imagine we're going to get to all 5 of them pretty quickly with 82 people on the chat function. But go ahead and provide evidence that you're following along by in the chat function. Type in one of the 5 things that make something a profession. A written set of standards, very good. That was Bruce. Governed by a code of ethics, that's the same one. A minimum of a bachelor's degree or some knowledge, outstanding. Knowledge and experience are required. Looks like we've got 2 of the 5 so far. Autonomy in the workplace, great. There's our 3rd. Looking for a couple more yet. Autonomy in the workplace, terrific. A degree, yep. CE degree, good, Paul. Education, Richard, good job. Self-regulating, very good. There's their 4th one, and there's 1 more. Licensure is not a requirement, so just want to make sure that Ron typed in licensure. The reality is licensure is not an absolute requirement, but you can be licensed certainly to be part of the profession. Guided by ethical standards. This is terrific. So again, great representation, good indication that you're following along here. I don't need any additional ones at this point. We've done a good job. I'll pull up the 5 that I had listed. It's going to be built on a large knowledge base. We got that one. Skills are important to society. That's the one that Albert just pulled up. Thank you very much, Albert. Skills provided by the members are important to society. Absolutely, the things that you do as a civil engineer are valued. They are self-regulating. That was mentioned by a number of folks. Autonomy in the workplace, that was also mentioned in the last one. Again, the focus of today's presentation, that we have to have some sort of written set of standards, which we call a code of ethics. So now I want to switch gears to the next learning objective, and that is identifying some of the challenges that ASCE as a professional organization felt existed with the prior code of ethics. And the first one is the recognition that the code of ethics was evolving, but it wasn't evolving fast enough to keep up with society. That is writ large society, not just ASCE society, as well as the changing technology. The reality is ASCE as an organization was founded in 1852. So 1852, for the first 62 years, we did not actually have a code of ethics. So while we were a professional society, we couldn't claim ourselves as a profession by definition until 1914. That's when the first code of ethics was developed by ASCE. Over those next roughly 100 years, the code went through a number of revisions and adoptions, but they were fairly minor. They were Band-Aids. In 1974, we first used the language that we would use. We would hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public. You'll find very similar language to the safety, health, and welfare of the public mentioned in just about every code of ethics associated with engineering out there in the field. It wasn't until the late 1990s that we actually introduced the concept of sustainable development into our code of ethics. And then in 2017, we added the last canon to the code of ethics. That was Canon 8, which focused on diversity, equity, and inclusivity. A little bit of an embarrassment for us as a profession that it took us that many years before we finally added some language around diversity, equity, and inclusivity. But recognize that over those years, it was 1974 was the last time that ASCE stepped back and said, we're going to rewrite our code of ethics. So it was 45 years between 1974 and 2018 when ASCE finally said, hey, it's time for us to rewrite our code of ethics. That's unfortunate that we had applied Band-Aids over that time period. I always equate this to, in high school, I had the opportunity to purchase a 1964 Ford Mustang. By definition, it was a Ford Mustang, but it had been owned by probably a couple of dozen different people. Everybody did a little bit of body work to it, and it had Band-Aids on it. Literally, in some cases, the body work was pretty bad. So it was a Ford Mustang by definition, just like our code of ethics was a code of ethics, but it had so many Band-Aids and edits that had been made to it, it just didn't read well. So the first reason ASCE felt there was good rationale for a new code was that the world had changed, but our code of ethics just didn't keep up with those revisions. In 1974, when that last revision was done, they used what was known as a canons-based model. And a canons-based model really takes topic areas and focuses individual topics in individual canons. So the way the code of ethics was structured was you would find everything related to diversity, equity, inclusivity only in Canon 8. You wouldn't find that in any other portion of the code. So while certain topics were certainly considered to be awfully important, they were not spread across the entire code. Instead, it was standalone areas. That was relatively in vogue at the time that canons-based models were used for codes of ethics that were written in the 1970s. But the majority of our sister organizations had adopted a more appropriate style of code of ethics that was based on a hierarchy system, which is actually our third item here. The code of ethics in 1974 up through 2017 did not actually have any hierarchy type system. What that meant was there was in many cases a difficulty to determine between stakeholders which one would take precedence. For example, it wasn't clear whether public safety would take precedence over a client request. Both of those we can, I think, all agree on. The request of an individual client is certainly important. The public safety is very important. But in our old code of ethics, you couldn't determine which one of those was the absolute, which one would have a higher precedence over another because it was a canons-based structure and it had no hierarchy built into it. So the third reason why ASCE felt there was a good time for us to revise the code of ethics was the lack of hierarchical understanding between different portions of the code. The fourth reason why ASCE said it was time for us to revise the code was that much of the language was rather American-centric. The language itself did not translate well into other languages or other cultures. And this is a problem when you step back and if you know anything about ASCE, realize while we are the American Society of Civil Engineers, we are an international organization. Our fastest growing membership is in Region 10, and Region 10 is the international membership of ASCE. And it's unfortunate if our code of ethics did not translate well into other languages that were represented by our professional organization. So one of the big reasons ASCE said, hey, it is time for us to make sure we're writing a new code and writing a new code that in language that translates well both in culture as well as other languages. And the fifth and final reason why ASCE said it was time for us to develop a new code was much of the language in the prior code, the 1970s version of the code, was a bit antiquated. The easiest one for me to demonstrate pulling a word out was there was language in there that said we will hold paramount the health, safety, and welfare of the public. Paramount is a term that's not regularly used in our daily lexicon in the world. Certainly not, it didn't actually translate well as was another issue. But if you say the word paramount to people nowadays, most people picture a movie studio or a streaming service that you use to get some TV online. The Paramount app is what people think about when they heard the term paramount. So it's just a bit antiquated as far as the language itself. And so ASCE, again, for the fifth reason, was that it was antiquated terminology. Now we've got another opportunity for you to exercise your fingers a little bit here and use the chat function. So what I'm asking you, what are the 5 reasons ASCE said it was time for a new code of ethics? Outdated, antiquated terminology, canon style, lack of hierarchy, very good. Canon model, lack of hierarchy, outstanding. American-centric language. The world continued to change and the code did not. Perfect. I think we hit all 5 of those. You can still type them in if you want to, but it was lengthy, it was disorganized, it was outdated, had an unclear hierarchy, it had American-centric terminology, and it was antiquated terminology as well. So I think we hit all 5 of those. Well done, everybody, keeping up with the chat function and demonstrating that you're tracking on what's been covered so far. So given that ASCE as a board of directors agreed that it was time for a new code of ethics, ultimately the guidance for a new code was brought forth by Robin Kemper, who was the ASCE president at that time. And Robin reached out to myself and asked if I was interested in serving as the chair of a task committee that was going to be charged with the idea of writing a new code and writing that new code from scratch. Understand that I was not necessarily the author of the new code. Instead, this was a committee's effort. The task committee, the name of the members of the task committee are up on the screen right now. I pulled that up really just to highlight a handful of things for you. First of all, there was 8 volunteer members. All of us were volunteers for a 2-year period. We invested literally hundreds of hours in the process of making revisions to a draft version of the code. And then writing and rewriting other drafts as we went along. We'll talk about some of the other activities that committee did. But first of all, I want to point out that there was a variety of types of members included on this task committee. We had a student member, Taylor, and then we had 2 younger members. That was Anna and Stephanie, were both younger members of the organization. It was very important to me that we had younger representation on that committee because when we think about what is the future of ASCE, what's the future of our profession, it is the younger members that are going to be operating under this code of ethics in theory for a longer period of time than individuals like myself. In addition to that, we had folks like Monty Phillips, who's a distinguished member of ASCE. Monty's also a past president of the National Society of Professional Engineers. So he was familiar with NSPE's code and how that was prepared. And then also of importance to me was we had 2 attorneys as members. Larry Shirelli and Tara Hoke were both attorneys. Tara Hoke is a name that many of you may recognize. She's actually a staff member of ASCE. She's the general counsel for ASCE, and she served as our staff contact on the committee. So while the committee was set up, the next thing was presenting a charge. So the board wrote up a simple charge for the committee, and it says the following: the task committee on the code of ethics is charged with developing and proposing a comprehensive overhaul to the ASCE code of ethics. While that's fairly simple, what it lacked was enough definition to mean what exactly does the board of direction mean by that. So we went back to the board and they provided some further explanation as to how the task committee was going to go about their work. First of all, we were asked to write a draft as if it was for the first time. So literally the committee was asked to no longer look at the existing 2017 version of the code of ethics. Instead, we tossed that out completely and we were writing from scratch. That was important to the board to make sure that we didn't simply, again, put additional Band-Aids on that version of the 1974 version and just simply make additional edits to it. They wanted us to literally start from scratch, which is a really unique opportunity to sit down and to write a code from scratch. They wanted to make sure that we identified moral concepts that all civil engineers would share. And they also wanted to make sure that those concepts would be written in a manner that was concise, readable, and used modern language. And I want to emphasize the concise and readable portion of that because I'm going to emphasize and show that to you here momentarily. Rather than sit down and with a blank piece of paper and for the committee to get together as a group and say, okay, what's the first line we want to write for a code of ethics? Instead, the first thing that the committee did was we sat down and said, we need to have a set of guiding principles for us to point to, a set of 8 principles that we would look at and say, this is what we're using as far as our guidance, as far as how we are going to write a code of ethics. One of those things that we first sat down and said was we want to make sure that the language in the new code of ethics would be aspirational in nature. That is, we wanted to make sure that the code would start with a credo-like statement, and after that have a series of ethical principles that are listed by stakeholder groups. So the first thing that the committee often went back to was, are we writing in an aspirational manner? The second thing, we wanted to make sure that the writing was empowering. We want to make sure that the code lists behaviors that the engineer will commit to, rather than a series of or a list of things that simply say, thou shalt not do this. Instead, the entire language of the new code of ethics is written using language that simply says, this is what an engineer will do to practice as an ethical civil engineer. In fact, I would charge folks that have a version of the code of ethics in front of them, do a Control F search on that document. I'm fairly certain you're not going to find the word not in that document anywhere. So nowhere in the language does it say you will not do this. Instead, it always says this is what you will do. So again, aspirational and empowering language. The behavioral compass that the board asked for, that was identifying specifically what are things that all civil engineers should live by as far as a compass on our daily activities. And then the fourth one was, we wanted to make sure that there was in fact a defined hierarchy. We wanted to make sure that there would be stakeholders, and that those stakeholders would be identified by number, and the numbering system would identify very clearly what was the hierarchy between those stakeholders. So there would be no question when reviewing the code of ethics, which of these terms or which of the expressions in the code would take precedence over one over another. It's very clearly laid out, and we'll look at that momentarily. So the first 4 of the 8 guiding principles that the committee used when writing the code was aspirational, empowering, a behavioral compass, and a defined hierarchy. The 5th one was going to have that stakeholder model. So we want to make sure that we were grouping individuals or groups of people into stakeholders. So it was important to us to identify those stakeholders and then put the stakeholders into the hierarchy itself. The 6th of the guiding principles, that it needed to be concise. That was very clear guidance we got from the board direction. They were very frustrated with what was a 5-page long document that had over 2,000 words in it. It just made it difficult for folks to find content related to an ethical dilemma they were facing because it was considered to be too long. So concise was absolutely, in fact, the new code is a maximum of 2 pages, depending on how it's formatted. It's easy to read, it's easy to share, and easy to print. Again, addressing the idea that some of the language in that prior code of ethics lacked universality. We want to make sure that it translated, all the terms translated into other languages, and we went to great lengths to make sure that was the case. And then also we wanted to make sure that that language was modern. So again, there was 8 principles that the Code of Ethics Task Committee used. Every time we sat down for a meeting, the first thing we did was we pulled up these 8 principles and said, are we adhering to these 8 guiding principles in our work today? And have we done that in any of the work that we've done to date? So again, one more opportunity here for you to make sure that we're using the chat function. So folks are already on top of it. I don't even need to prompt you. We define hierarchy, aspirational language. Very good. A stakeholder model. Thanks, Mike. Concise. Very good, Brian. Empowering. You're absolutely right on there, Paul. Define hierarchy. Good. Concise. Again, we see that. Behavioral compass. Outstanding, David. Modern. Absolutely. And universal. Very good, Charles. I'm going to go ahead and pull up my list. Aspirational, empowering, behavioral compass, defined hierarchy, stakeholder model, concise, universal language, and modern language. And I think you're going to find evidence as we take a look at here momentarily, as we actually look at the actual code of ethics, you'll see how that shows up. Those 8 different guiding principles were used and that influenced the final product. So I want to focus for a moment on the idea of it being concise. And as engineers, we love a bar graph. So I've got a bar graph for us here, which represents the original number of words that were in the 2017 version of the Code of Ethics. Again, that was the rewritten version from 1974 that was modified and band-aid a number of times throughout the years between 1974 and 2017. They were up to over 2,000 words in the document. The new Code of Ethics only has a maximum of 675 words in it. That wasn't a limit that was put on us. We simply wrote, and we wrote trying to be concise in our approach. And then in the process, the final product was 675 words long. Now, a lot of folks, when we show this type of evidence, are going to immediately say, well, then you must be missing something. You must have missed out. There's no way that you got all the good content of what was 2,000 words and somehow boiled that down to a much shorter version. So one of the things that the task committee did was what's known as a crosswalk. So up on the screen, the intent here isn't that you be able to read this. This is more for an illustration. On the left-hand side of the screen is the 5 pages of the original Code of Ethics, or the prior Code of Ethics that was the version that was in place in 2017. 5 pages of the document. And on the right-hand side, you see the 2 pages of the document is in the current Code of Ethics that was approved in 2020. And what we notice here is that what we did as a task committee was we crawled through line item by line item on the original Code of Ethics, the 2017 version, and made sure that there was evidence of, for every line that showed up in the 2017 version, was that topic somewhere covered in the 2020 version of the Code of Ethics. And then we flipped that, and on the right-hand side of the screen, you see where we crawled through the new Code of Ethics and ensured that there was all the content was being covered, what was in the prior Code of Ethics. The reality is there's a couple of places that show up here, and I'm going to use my cursor to highlight where it says not in current code, not in current code, not in current code. What that showed us was the new Code of Ethics was actually covering some topics that were not in the 2017 version of the code. So what we claim is that not only 100% of the content from the 2017 version made it into the new code, but 110% made it in there, because we're actually covering a number of topics to include things like emerging technology and educating the public, were topics that were not in the 2017 version of the code that ended up in the 2020 version. I want to take a drill it down a little bit further and look at that specifically in reference to the diversity, equity, and inclusivity as concepts. So again, I mentioned in 2017, ASCE incorporated what was Canon 8, which was a canon that was specifically dedicated to the concepts of diversity, equity, and inclusivity. The reality is that was the only place in the Code of Ethics that one would find anything related to diversity, equity, and inclusivity. The stakeholder model that the Code of Ethics Task Committee used in writing the new code, instead of taking a singular location and saying this is where all diversity, equity, and inclusivity would appear, they took the topic and actually spread it across the 5 different stakeholders. So what you see here on the right-hand side of the screen is all the locations where these topics appear within the new Code of Ethics. So there are 5 stakeholders in the new Code of Ethics, and those 5 stakeholders, the content of diversity, equity, and inclusivity show up in 1F, which is treat all persons with respect, dignity, and fairness, and reject all forms of discrimination and fairness, discrimination and harassment, rather. It shows up in 1G, which is acknowledge the diverse historical, societal, and cultural needs of the community. 1B, consider and balance societal, environmental, and economic impacts. 5D, promote and exhibit inclusive, equitable, and ethical behavior in all engagements with colleagues. 5E, act with honesty and fairness on collaborative work ethics. 5F, encourage and enable the education and development of engineers and prospective members of the profession. And finally, 5G, which is supervise equity and respectfully. The reality is, the point being here is we took topics like diversity, equity, and inclusivity and really spread them across the entire document rather than just being a single standalone location. So one of the things the task committee did was make sure that we were not working in isolation and simply coming back to the board and saying, well, here's the Code of Ethics we've written. Instead, we engaged with a large number of different organizations within ASCE and external to ASCE. On this slide, what I'm listing off are the various ASCE committees that we engaged with, that along the way we said, here's a draft version of the new Code of Ethics. Can we get your folks to look at it, provide comment, provide feedback, and then we as a group would would actually incorporate the feedback we received from these committees. One of the most important ones is the Committee on Professional Conduct, which is listed right there at the top. If someone were to violate the ASCE Code of Ethics, and that was brought forward to someone like Tara Hoke at ASCE, the General Counsel, she would in turn take the case and actually put that in front of the Committee on Professional Conduct. They're the organization that adjudicates any cases that are brought forward. So they were an awfully important group to make sure that they liked the way that the new Code of Ethics was written, that they felt that they could work with it, that they felt it was structured appropriately, that allowed them to adjudicate cases. They actually took a large number of past cases and used those cases to test the new Code of Ethics along the way. And then in addition, we actually reached out to other organizations within ASCE, the Documents Committee, Licensure Committee, Sustainability Committee, Committee on Education, members of Society Advancing an Inclusive Council, that's Mosaic. And then we also met with and made presentations to a large number of sections, branches, and institutes, very similar to what I'm doing today. But at that point, we were simply saying, here's a draft version of the Code of Ethics. This is what it looks like. This is the way it's structured. This is why it's structured the way it is. And we asked for solicited feedback from those sections, branches, regions, and institutes. We also reached out outside of ASCE to a number of sister organizations, to include the National Society of Professional Engineers, the American Society of Mechanical Engineers, the American Council of Engineering Companies, and the National Institute for Engineering Ethics, which at that time was housed at Texas Tech and now is located at Purdue University. And in those cases, we were putting in front of them, and mostly their attorneys, and said, here is a copy of our draft version of the Code of Ethics. Would you be so kind as to provide a peer review of that document? And we got great feedback from groups along the way during that process. We also reached to the individual members. So twice during the lifetime of the task committee, we set up a series of websites and posted draft versions of the ASCE Code of Ethics at that time. And then an email was sent out to the 150,000 plus members of ASCE, asking them to go to a website and provide feedback on the draft version of the Code of Ethics. While the email went and the invitation went to all 150,000 plus members of ASCE, the reality is on this particular version of the code, version 2.0, we only received feedback from 335 members. While initially that sounds a little disappointing to say, it's unfortunate that only 335 people took the time. The reality is, of those 335 members, we received over 1,300 individual comments on that version of the Code of Ethics. And I want everybody to understand that as a committee, we actually crawled through all those individual comments one at a time, and then we responded to those comments when we were able to do so. So we actually wrote back to all those members and said, thank you for your comment. Your comment was taken into consideration. This is how we've incorporated your comment into the new version of the Code of Ethics. And then one of the things that was of interest to me was, while we didn't necessarily collect too much demographic data from the individuals, we did receive what was their member number when folks provided comments on the website. And we actually asked ASCE membership to actually take all those member numbers and then break them down based on age. Because one of the things that was important to me was I wanted to make sure we were reaching a variety of the membership when it came to the demographic of age. So one of the things that I find notable here is that we were reaching younger members, which again are the future of the profession and future of ASCE, as well as we were reaching some of the older members, because there was concern presented that perhaps some of the older members may not utilize the email or may not utilize the website in their process of providing feedback. So we provided a good representation to the membership across the board. The final product was actually reviewed by the ASCE Board of Direction in October of 2020, and it was approved not unanimously. I do want to note that there was one dissenting vote out of the entire board. One individual did feel there was no need for a new Code of Ethics and voted against it. But the board ultimately approved the new Code of Ethics. And at that time, the task committee was disbanded. So the task committee no longer exists. I'm no longer a chair of any committee for ASCE. I'm just simply a current member who looks for opportunities to make presentations along these lines. But one of the things I want to point out is here's a beautiful version of the ASCE Code of Ethics that you can actually download from the ASCE website. You can print this out on 11 by 17. You can post it in your break room or in your cubicle. I strongly encourage you to do so, because as a member of ASCE, you are strongly encouraged to obviously live by the ASCE Code of Ethics, and there's no better way to demonstrate that you're willing to do that than to post a copy of the Code of Ethics. So while the content on this slide may be a little bit small for you to read, in a minute here, I'm going to go section by section and highlight certain portions of that code to illustrate how it actually operates. But one of the things I want to point out here is that, again, there is a preamble or a credo section to this Code of Ethics, followed by 5 stakeholders. So you've got society, you've got natural and built environment, you've got the profession, and then you've got clients and employers, and then section 5 or stakeholder 5 is peers. The way the hierarchical system works is society is more important than the natural and built environment. Natural and built environment is more important than profession, and profession is more important than clients and employers. And finally, clients and employers are more important than peers. However, within let's look at stakeholder profession. 3A is no more important than 3B, which is no more important than 3C, 3D, and 3E. However, 2A is more important than 3A, which is the way the stakeholder system works. And in fact, that is described here in the preamble section of the Code of Ethics. So I just want to make sure everybody understands you are required as an ethical engineer to adhere to all 5 sections of the Code of Ethics. But the reality is, if you're concerned about some section being in conflict with another, there is a clear hierarchy system in place which allows you to differentiate between which one would take precedence over another. So again, I'm going to take a look at all 5 individual sections, but first we'll look at the preamble. And in the preamble, it makes it very clear that all members of ASCE, regardless of their classification or job description, are required to adhere to the Code of Ethics. Recognize we've got a large number of ASCE members that are not licensed professional engineers, that are not actually civil engineers by background, but are perhaps attorneys, environmental engineers, scientists, etc., that are all members of ASCE, regardless of their classification, regardless of whether they are licensed or not. They are required to adhere to the ASCE Code of Ethics per this preamble section. Things I like to highlight here in society, which again is the first and highest stakeholder, is item 1A, which was mentioned in the preamble. It's repeated in the preamble, but it's also listed here. And in the preamble, it says specifically that 1A is the most important of all items written in the Code of Ethics. And it simply states that first and foremost, we are going to protect the safety, health, and welfare of the public. Item 1D identifies that we are going to have 0 tolerance for bribery, fraud, and corruption in all forms. And item 1F is that we're going to treat all persons with respect, dignity, and fairness while rejecting all forms of discrimination. Again, I'm just highlighting a handful of these. These are ones that pop out to me as being some of the most meaningful ones, but all these are required for us to adhere to. The second stakeholder is the natural and built environment. And a lot of folks usually ask here at this point, why was the natural and built environment not necessarily listed as the top stakeholder? Why is the environment not our number 1 stakeholder? Why is it not number 1 in the hierarchy? The reality is that the task committee viewed the primary role of civil engineers as developing solutions to problems in society. Without question, it would be essentially impossible to implement any civil engineering solution without somehow impacting the environment in some manner. However, civil engineers can solve society's problems while also adhering to the principles of sustainable development, which is item 2A, and considering and balancing environmental, societal, and economic impact, which is item 2B, with our solutions. The only way to do no harm to the environment would be to do no projects at all. That is the precise reason why the environment was not listed as stakeholder number 1. Placing the environment at the peak of the hierarchy would truly make it truly difficult for us to do any type of projects and for us to implement the Code of Ethics. The third stakeholder is the profession. And again, that's our profession of civil engineering. Items here to recognize are item 3B, which is the requirement to practice in compliance with all legal requirements, and 3G, which is the requirement to continue professional development. You will notice that in this section, in none of the other sections, will you find specific call out relative to licensure. To be licensed is not a requirement to be an ethical engineer. To be licensed is not a requirement to be part of the profession. While I'm a licensed engineer and I strongly support licensure, nowhere in here does it make it a requirement for you to be a licensed engineer to be an ethical engineer. Item 4, or stakeholder 4, is clients and employers. In this case, the items I'm going to highlight for you are item 4C, which is to communicate regarding risks and limitations. Item 4E, which is protection of proprietary information for our clients and employers. And item 4F, which is work only in one's areas of competence. And then finally, the last stakeholder is the peers. And again, while all these items are important, I'm just highlighting a handful that speak strongly to me. Item 5B, which is provide proper attribution. Item 5E, which is act with honesty and fairness on collaborative work. And item 5G, which is supervision in an equitable and respectful manner. All right, so now this is going to be another opportunity for you to use the chat function. I've got a series of dilemmas, and I'm watching the clock, and I recognize we're not going to get through all the dilemmas. We're probably just going to do the first 2 or 3, and then I'll jump to the last dilemma to wrap up. But what I'm asking you to do is take a look at your version of the ASCE Code of Ethics and identify which sections of that ASCE Code of Ethics would help us deal with the dilemma on the screen. I'll read that dilemma to you. It simply states that an ASCE student member, recognized student members are full members of ASCE and therefore are required to adhere to the Code of Ethics. But a student member pays someone to do their homework and submits it and takes credit for another person's work. So a number of you are already jumping on it. Then suggesting that 5A, which is only take credit for professional work they personally completed, agree 100%. Another person said 1D, which is had zero tolerance for bribe, robbery, and corruption. You could make that claim. I agree with you on that one. Any others? Looks like 3A, uphold the honor, integrity, and dignity of the profession. Well done. Looks like that was Robbie. Good job with 3A. The reality is you couldn't probably make 3A a claim for all ethical dilemmas. That's just one that we should be adhering to. Honor, integrity, and dignity of our profession. 5B has also been thrown out. So that's provide attribution for the work of others. I agree with that one as well. 3D, reject practices of unfair competition. You could argue that that would be unfair to use somebody else's work. I'm going to pull up on my screen the handful that I identified. I had 1D, zero tolerance for fraud. Did not uphold honor and integrity. Again, I think it was Robbie that had that one. That's terrific. 5A, only take credit for professional work when they personally completed. 5B, provide attribution for the work of others. And I think that's all the ones. Yep, that's all the ones that I had listed. It doesn't mean that others aren't also correct. Those are just ones that I had listed as the ones that speak to me most strongly as far as items. So great job. We did real well with that first ethical dilemma. Let's take a look at the second ethical dilemma, which is a homeowner hires an ASCE member to assess the cracks in their foundation. The ASCE member does work in the environmental arena, but provides a report that the cracks are not a structural issue. The house foundation fails and the house is condemned and cannot be occupied. So again, using the chat function, which portions of the ASCE Code of Ethics do you think apply here? I've got a vote already for 4F, perform services only in areas of their competence. Found fantastic. That's a really good one. 4F. 3C, mitigate adverse social environmental, I'm sorry, that's the wrong one. 3C is represent the professional qualifications and experience truthfully. Agree 100%. 1C, express professional opinions truthfully and only when founded on adequate knowledge and honest conviction. That's terrific. 1A, absolutely, we're not protecting the health, safety, and welfare of the public when we issue a report that doesn't, that ultimately results in a house being condemned and cannot be occupied. I've got 4F here is listed. Perform services only in the area of competence. Good. 1A, good. 3C, good. Looks like we've got most of those. Let's see which ones that I pulled up. I had 4C, communicate any risks and limitations related to their work. So certainly if you're going to write a report that's not in your area of expertise, you need to make that clear. This is not within my area of expertise, as well as you should probably not be performing services in that area because that's not within your area of competence. 4F. Third dilemma for us. So here we've got an ASCE member regularly attends social section meetings and regularly volunteers time in organizing section activities. The member indicates interest in serving on the ASCE section board, but is consistently not selected to serve on the section board or reach any leadership positions. The ASCE member believes that their gender, race, sexual orientation, or age is the reason that they are unable to join the section board or other leadership position. So which sections of the ASCE code do you think would help us navigate this dilemma? I've got to vote for 1F. 1F is treat all persons with respect, dignity, and fairness and reject all forms of discrimination and harassment. I agree with you 100%. Brian had that one. Looks like Charles had that one. A number of folks had 1F. That's fantastic. 5D, promote and exhibit inclusive, equitable, and ethical behavior in all engagement with colleagues. Agree with that 100% as well. One of the things I'm going to note as you continue to type in your suggestions for this one, all these ethical dilemmas, with the exception of the very last one we're going to look at, are actually real ethical dilemmas that the Committee on Professional Conduct has actually adjudicated on. They provided these to me as examples of codes of ethic violations that they've adjudicated in the past. So again, it looks like we're seeing some of the same ones appearing. I listed the preamble, which also includes treat all persons with dignity, respect, and fairness. 1F, again, that was called out. And then 5D, those are the ones, not necessarily all those. A number of you also included things like 5I and 5H. 5I is notable in that if we found somebody that was in violation of the code, what do? We have an obligation to report that to ASCE. Anybody know who we would report that to at ASCE? What's the name of the person that we would go ahead and type that in if you've got it? Who's the person that you would send an ethical violation to if you suspected a violation was occurring? Because we do have an obligation, so it's a toleration clause. Tara Hoke, very good. Tara is the person, and her email is tara.hoke@asce.org. So if you ever felt like there was an ethical violation that was occurring, whether it's occurring to you or to others, that's the right person to report to. ASCE Legal Counsel, very good. All right, let's take a look at our next ethical dilemma, number 4. So we've got a small engineering firm which also has a testing lab sister company. The president of that company is an ASCE member. The testing lab has been contracted to perform tests on a federally funded project. In order to keep up with the volume of tests required for this project, they take shortcuts in the testing and falsify some testing results. So which portions of the ASCE Code of Ethics apply here? 1A, 3A, absolutely 3A. Remember that one could probably be applied for all of them. That's uphold the honor and integrity. 3C, represent the professional qualifications and experience truthfully. 5D, promote and exhibit inclusive, equitable, and ethical engagement. Yep, so making sure we're being ethical along the way. Looks like 4A, act as faithful agents with integrity and professionalism. I agree with that one. 4G, approve, sign, and seal only work that has been prepared and reviewed. So if the work wasn't done in the first place, clearly it wasn't done under someone's review. I think that's a great one. 3A, again, uphold the honor and integrity. 4A, act as a faithful agent. I agree with that 100%. Making sure we're compliance with legal requirements in the jurisdiction. That could be an issue here as well, absolutely. 5G, service, supervise equitably and respectfully. Clearly, we're not doing that. We're not showing respect when we're falsifying results. So let's see which ones that I had listed. 1D, zero tolerance for for bribery and fraud. Clearly, there's fraud occurring here when we're falsifying data. Upholding the honor and integrity of and dignity of the profession. I'm going to skip this last one. I'm going to leave it on the screen just long enough because I know it's being recorded. So you can do this one at home on your own if you watch the recorded version. I'm going to note that 4G and 3A are the two that I'm going to do. And I'm going to go to our last ethical dilemma, just in the interest of time. So this one in particular, I'm not really looking for you to identify sections of the code that might apply here. But if on my way home tonight, I decide to drive at 60 miles per hour in a 55-mile-an-hour zone, first question for you to type into the chat function is this an ethical issue? Or well, actually, don't do ethical first. Let's do legal. Is this a legal issue? Is it illegal for me to drive 60 in a 55? So Paul says yes. Sammy Hagar, very good. Great reference there. Andrew says yes. A lot of folks saying yes, it's clearly illegal. And I agree with you 100%. It is illegal for me to drive 60 miles an hour in a 55 zone. Even if I'm driving in the slow lane and traffic is passing me on the left-hand side like I'm standing still, it is illegal regardless of what the rest of society is doing. So the next question for you, is it amoral? That is it a violation of my morals for me to drive 60 in a 55? Is it amoral for me to do this? I'm just going to pause for a moment for you to type that in. A large number of you are saying no. And the truth of the matter is, none of you can actually answer that. When we talk about morals, morals are in individuals. Very good. Somebody said depends on you. Michael said depends on you. George said depends. And Brian said maybe. The reality is you don't know my morals. You don't know me well enough to know whether I believe it's morally incorrect for me to drive 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. Don't judge me. Very good one, Ron. So the reality is only I can answer whether it's a moral dilemma for me to drive 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. I can tell you that I'm going to be okay with that. It's only 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. If it were 5 miles over a speed limit in a school zone, yes, I would have a strong moral dilemma on my hands, and I would not be doing that. But in a 55 mile an hour zone where the traffic is driving by me like I'm standing still, chances are I'm going to be okay and be comfortable with that if I believe the traffic conditions warrant it being okay. That doesn't mean, please understand, this doesn't mean Dr. Berry's saying it's okay for you to go ahead and exceed the speed limit. My last question for you, is this unethical? And now you're looking at this relative to the ASCE Code of Ethics. The issue is, am I actually practicing as a professional engineer or as a member of our profession while I'm driving home at the end of the night? So the closest we would probably find here is 3A, which would say, am I upholding the honor, integrity, and dignity of the profession? Now, this changes drastically if on the side of my vehicle it says the name of my company, or if it said the United States Military Academy, who I work for. Recognize that if you're driving a company vehicle, I would argue at that point, and it says on the side, it becomes a professional issue, it becomes a unethical issue, and you are in fact in violation of the ASCE Code of Ethics. And I agree that's a different situation than if myself driving a privately owned vehicle with no indication on the side that I'm a licensed professional engineer or a member of the profession of civil engineers, or I'm part of a particular company, that at that point, we cross the line on whether it's ethical or unethical. Again, I'm watching the clock and I'm trying to bring this in right on time. I'm going to bring up my closing slide, which has my email address on it. If you have questions about anything I've covered, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can also find me on LinkedIn. I'm more than happy at any point to help folks deal with ethical dilemmas if you feel like you're challenged with one. But at the end of the day, I do applaud your willingness to sit through the hour-long presentation on ethics. It is the backbone of our profession. If we don't have ethics as a profession, then we're certainly not a profession in and of itself. And I thank you for taking the time to improve your own understanding of ASCE's Code of Ethics. With that, I say thank you to Nikki and the rest of the group that invited me to give the presentation, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thanks, Brock. We really appreciate it. I know I'm watching the clock a little bit here too. I guess if anybody has any questions, they can put them in the chat. We can see if maybe we can field a few questions here real quick. I know we were kind of interactive throughout, so it's possible that nobody has any questions at the moment. So if anyone doesn't have any questions right now, you know, if any come up, you can always follow up at our email address or at Brock's as well that he provided. So I'm just going to share my screen real quick again, just some closing remarks. Did I see? Okay. Okay, just a comment in the chat. I thought possibly it was a question. Just somebody noting that the hierarchy and stakeholder system really cleans up how you address potential issues. This is a great change. So yeah, this was a great presentation. So we appreciate it, Brock. Very informative. Just want to note that our next meeting next month coming up quick. It's April 11th. It's the joint meeting with ASCE and the other technical groups. The SE, so we'll have breakout session presentations for each tech group, and the SEI presentation is going to be on the I-95 to Coney Viaduct. So encourage you to register. That should be a good event. And just to note again, our golf outing is May 3rd, so please get your registrations in and come join us. And just, yeah, some additional notes on the golf outing. So thank you everyone for joining us, and everyone have a great day. Thanks. Sorry, just one more thing. I did just paste the PDH link in the chat. So if anyone hopped off and is wondering what the link is, you can share that with them and access the PDH there. Thanks, everyone.